Time to jump on the catch can bandwagon. While this engine is port injected, so it doesn't have the carbon buildup on intake valves that a direct injection engine would be cursed with, it does have a few quirks based on how the PCV system is routed. As can happen with older vehicles, there's a few twists and turns in this project, so I highly encourage you to watch the whole video before jumping to any conclusions about this particular product or its application. Instructions. Looks like the catch can itself. Steel wool, some fittings, a sticker, looks like 3/8 pipe. I'm not going to be using that, but could find another use for it sometime. Extra O-rings and some hose clamps. Bracket. That's handy. System uses a 5/8 diameter hose. These are 1/2 inch barbs. A little bit of creativity and a lot of clamping force should hold it okay. There really is zero pressure on this part of the system. Catch can itself is surprisingly heavy. Machined aluminum. Loud threads taking it apart. Want to put a little bit of oil on those. Basin has an O-ring. Got an inlet port. Little mini baffle. That's where some of the steel wool goes to help condense the oil vapors. Dipstick with threads and a little O-ring for it. I was wondering what this extra little threaded port in here is. It doesn't go all the way through. I suspect this is for an additional baffle that's not offered on this base model. Holder for the steel wool just screws out all the way, leaving just the top of the catch can. Then I think, yes. This then unscrews into 2 halves. It's really kind of handy, because this can be pulled off, cleaned, serviced, and put back without removing the entire catch can. Instructions got color pictures, but don't mention anything about setting up the baffle. Want enough to condense the oil, not enough to cause a restriction. Aside from the very low cost, one reason I did go with this model versus a fancier one is I actually like the steel wool base filter instead of the sintered bronze. This is going to be less restrictive. I'm not interested in catching the fine particles that somehow would be coming out of the crankcase. I simply want to intercept oil mist and droplets. These are straight metric threads that don't have an O-ring. Therefore I need to use a little bit of Teflon tape to seal them. Wrap the tape in such a direction that as it is tightened, it does not catch and peel back the end. Finish snugging those up. Using the catch can's own dipstick to put a tiny bit of Marvel Mystery Oil on those threads so maybe they don't screech as much when I take it on and off. Let's see, does that quiet them down any? Yeah, look at that, no more screeching. This bracket only has 2 options for where the catch can mount, though there's nothing stopping me from drilling additional holes as needed. And the catch can itself can tuck in down here, right next to the brake reservoir. There's the metering orifice, or as commonly called the PTC because of the thermistor-based heater built into it. That discharges crankcase vapors just upstream of the compressor inlet on the turbo when the system's in boost. When the system is not in boost, a tiny pinhole orifice meters the vapors out through this pipe through the intake manifold using the vacuum. Oil drops often condense in the pipe, drip into the intake tube, and then seep out where the intake tube meets the turbo. It never leaves spots in the driveway, but the compressor housing and the areas underneath it are always damp with oil. Oil that does get sucked through the turbo coats the inside of the boost pipes, gets into the intercooler, and eventually works its way out through the weep hole, so the tray of the front air dam is also constantly damp with oil and accumulated mud. Got the hose popped free. Can just see some of the slime that ends up in here. I'll wipe what I can. Hose overall is pretty much clear. Yum, that's what gets sent through the turbo and into the intake. Got a new length of hose attached down to the metering orifice. Somewhere around this square marking is a good place to cut it. Right about like that. Now, I want to have a decent idea if this is going to work or not. Instead of permanently mounting it to the cowl with the bracket, I'm going to secure it to the upper torque mount here in approximately the same position, just long enough so I can run it for a few days and determine if it's going to help or not. As the saying goes, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary fix that works. Got a whole bunch of zip ties looking like a spider web. Used 2 bits of that 3/8 hose that came with the catch can kit as bumpers so it's not rattling directly against the torque rod. Not hitting the brake fluid sensor. Good enough for testing. Prototyping setup done. Tube from the OEM oil separator into the catch can, out of the catch can, another tube down to the metering orifice. Added these two clamps here because the hose really wanted to kink right at this spot, and just a little bit of pressure keeps it round and keeps it from collapsing. These clamps tightened up all right. Hose isn't moving. Should be plenty sealed for a system under negligible pressure. Time for the glove test. Why is it called the glove test? Because the tool is literally a rubber glove. Between the soft fail of the glove test and 150 miles of test driving, it's clear this isn't quite set up right. I have a little bit more oil making its way out around the fill cap and also along the perimeter of the cam cover. Crankcase pressure is ever so slightly positive instead of ever so slightly negative, and that's not what I want. Oh yeah, there's definitely some slime. I don't think that's anything on the dipstick itself, but I still want to pull the can down and see what's inside. I may or may not need to cut this lower zip tie to get the reservoir off. It unscrews. Whether I can maneuver it out of there nicely is another story. Maneuver this out of here without spilling the contents. Oh, stuck on the dipstick. Oh, it's definitely caught some stuff. We'll take a closer look at the cocktail of crap in there and take a look at the filter. Let's see what's in here. Flows like water. Whew, that smells weird. Wonder if this caught some of the sea foam as it boiled off. Now I'm going to pull off the stainless steel mesh filter. Lots of goop building up on the back side of this. I have a feeling despite me going lean on the steel wool, it's still a little too restrictive for this application. So I'm going to take the mesh ball completely out and just use the baffle without any packing. I'm hoping this solves the crankcase pressure problem. If not, the PCV system itself may need adjustments in order to function with the catch cannon circuit. Oh, that looks delicious. This would be called Forbidden Milkshake, except it's only here at the entrance of the catch can. Weakness of this mounting location is how I have to take the hoses off in order to get the reservoir out, but I don't have to redo any of my zip ties, so that's a win. Glove test, take 2. Coolant is at full operating temperature. Yeah, that's hot. The glove does not fully puff up like a balloon like it did before. Whether it will be enough difference, have to wait and see. The tell will be the little bit of oil accumulating around the oil fill cap on the top of the cam cover. Yikes. Get back on there. Doing voiceover for this part since I goofed and failed to set up the mic properly. I suspected restriction in the vacuum line between the metering orifice and the intake. It had a couple extra splices. This one by the throttle, and this one by the manifold. Both were done years ago, trying to resolve that pinched balloon effect of the hose collapsing under vacuum and screaming, as seen here in my recap of the cylinder head saga. The barb on the manifold is in a tough spot to access, let alone film, because of the radiator hose, power steering pump, and design of the manifold itself. Just imagine an extended sequence of me fighting a spring clamp with long needle nose pliers, punctuated with every curse I know, and some made up on the spot. This last section of hose shows signs of collapse under vacuum where it made the 90-degree turn into the intake. Though it wasn't making the pinch balloon noise, I could not observe it very well while the engine was running, and I don't trust it. I decided to replace the entire section with a single length of 7/32 hose, same size as what I had there before, but no splices, and it's much larger than the tiny 3mm tubing the stock system used. There. Audio's back. That's what voiceover's for, right? Got a zip tie at the end of the split loom so it doesn't simply peel off as I feed the hose through. Like pushing wet spaghetti uphill, gotta grab it from the other end and pull. And that still wants to get caught. Feeding that through. Bring the rest of the loom around. Okay, got it fed all the way along here over by where the throttle is. Need to slide a little bit more of the loom over it, and then I can trim the loom off. Goal is to get the slack through so it makes a nice 90-degree turn down in here without risk of kinking, like it did before. One improvement I figured out is I can slide the catch can up off of its zip tie mount without having to unscrew the reservoir. It makes it a lot easier to take it out without spilling. Next I have to pull off the other end of that hose with the barb connector and the spring clamps that connects to the PCV metering orifice. Got the second section of hose off. This little elbow here is original. It's somewhat of a reducing elbow, but I think I can get a new hose to fit over the top of the barb and make the turn without having to splice it. Put split loom along the rest of the hose for good measure. Gonna feed it down underneath the throttle, roughly parallel with the bundle of wires going to the injectors. Then along the side of the head, parallel with the vapor pipe from the flame trap. Yes, this is easier to do, taking the charge air pipe and the air box and the intake tube out of the way, but it's plenty doable without, if you got small hands like me. I'm pretty happy with the routing over where it enters the manifold, so I'm going to zip tie it up here before it can even think about interfering with the throttle linkage. Snug fit, but the new hose slides over the barb on the metering orifice. Catch can back in place, new hose secured, time to see if it works. One warm-up lap around the neighborhood later, as daylight is fading, time to see what the glove test is this time. If you haven't yet, consider liking and subscribing if you're finding this useful. It really helps me out. Ever so slightly better. Before, the glove would fill up like a balloon and actually pop off. Here is just kind of sitting there limp, so the crankcase is at effectively neutral pressure at idle. I'm going to call this good enough to run for a little while, see if I still have the oil coming out around the fill cap, the dipstick, and at the backside of the cam cover. In fact, just as I finished saying that, looks like we got a good pass on the glove test now. The glove is actually being vacuumed in. That is exactly what the glove test should show for a good PCV system. I'm a little bit more confident now. Here's what the dipstick looks like after about 200 miles. Maybe 50 of in-town, 50 of medium trips, and 100 of which was 1 day of some longer trips. Interesting, yesterday there was a little bit of the yellow oil emulsion slime at the dipstick. Can't see anything now. Can see the difference between the inlet and the outlet ports. Curious, there's still the emulsion slime on the inlet. This was after the longer trips, so it got really, really hot. It's sitting pretty close to the exhaust. There's the emulsion slime. Guess it was in there after all. And whoa, that's got a stench to it. All right, what does it look like pouring out? Quite a bit of slime that stuck to the walls of the can. Definitely water, but with the emulsion, with its oil content and air content floating on top, but also some heavier components that sink. That looks and smells amazing. Wish you could be here. Small amounts of slime on the baffles and the inlet port, but it's certainly not blocked. Outlet port is mostly just damp with condensation and doesn't really have the slime in there. So the can is doing something good. Before anyone freaks out saying my head gasket's gone, burning a given volume of gasoline will produce a similar volume of water. If even a fraction of a percent slips by the rings into the crankcase and is expelled through the crankcase ventilation, this kind of oil emulsion is going to result. Frequently seen under the oil fill cap or in the dipstick tube on cars that are short-tripped in colder climates. I'm in a mild climate here, so I never see any of this in either of those locations, but when it gets to the catch can, the vapors suddenly cool down, and this is the result. I want a more secure container than an open-top glass jar for collecting this stuff over time. Just gonna pour it right into this plastic bottle. That'll be my crankcase cocktail holder. Blue funnel lets me invert either the glass jar or the catch can itself and let them drain while I do other stuff. With all the various configuration changes, I've not had a chance to run the catch can for a more extended interval before draining it. This time I did. This was about 600 miles, varied freeway, high speed, stop and go, in town, whole range of conditions, though longer trips in general. Can see there's still a little bit of that emulsion slime on the exit side, but less so than on the inlet side. A little bit of steam coming out because it's still pretty warm in here. I just got done with the drive. Before, it was largely water with a little bit of emulsion floating on top. This almost looks like the entire thing is emulsion. In the catch can cocktail bottle, you can see an example of what it was before. emulsion, but with this amber water that smells somewhere like whiskey and a refinery combined. Let's see what this looks like. Delicious! So this looked like it was all emulsion. I suppose that means that the various conditions I was in with the longer trips would have the catch can getting hotter. See what's inside the capsule here. Less emulsion, more oil, so this area has been, or at least was, hot enough to largely keep the water in its vapor state. So it looks less white yellow, a lot more brown oil colored. Certainly a lot of it is getting intercepted by the catch can rather than making it to the rest of the PCV system. Doesn't seem at particularly high risk of clogging up, but this does leave me at a bit of a crossroads here. I know that when I put even a small amount of the steel wool in the capsule here, it does restrict it enough that I can see a difference on the glove test. However, from the looks of things, I could probably benefit from some amount of additional baffling. In what form that takes, I got a bit of thinking to do. Crankcase vapors come in, expand in the chamber above the first baffle, hit that baffle, this little capsule, second baffle. However, what can happen is they can pretty easily just take a short circuit right to the outlet, which is why there is a little bit more goop here than I'd want to see. Now these do have this threaded hole here, which on another model would have an additional baffle. This one doesn't come with that, that's only on the more expensive ones. I'm wondering, can I find a bolt that fits there and fabricate an extra baffle that would do the job for me? For good measure, I first went through my spare nuts and bolts variety bin and found these carriage bolts that thread right in. Was able to take this bolt to the hardware store and match it up with a longer one. In this case, with the Evil Energy catch can, the thread pitch is M8 by 1 1/4. I chose a 50mm long bolt, threads in nicely here, and it will hold the baffle a good distance away from the existing capsule. Using a little bit of cardboard aided design to mock up how I want the baffle, this idea, minus some perforations, is the kind of baffle that a fancier version of this catch can or other brands would come with. Here's another idea that I'm liking a little bit better. Have the baffle bend down, still have it be perforated on the bottom and the wall. Here's a version cut out of sheet metal, minus the perforations. Crankcase vapors come in through the capsule and its baffles, hit this, and will be forced to either filter through it or go around it instead of a short circuit right to the outlet. There's some perforations. Holes were too small for my deburring tool, but hit both sides with the file, also the edges, so it's not going to try to bite me. Okay, there's the baffle, and yes, it fits together. Measuring how much collects in the can and its composition may not be feasible with the equipment I have. What I can do is keep track of how much deposits I see on the outlet side of the can. Before, after a few hundred miles, there'd be some of the emulsion visible on this port instead of just the inlet. So, in the middle of that adventure, where my starter motor left me stranded several hundred miles from home, I also discovered that the main hose between the flame trap and the catch can had collapsed and kinked itself almost completely shut after softening from the oil exposure and repeated heat cycles. That means the PCV system was almost completely choked off, even with everything else being perfect. All of my testing with this catch can so far was under the handicap of having a restriction that I didn't even know about in the system. I could probably get away with putting the steel wool back here in the baffle and keeping my custom-made baffle and getting even better performance out of this budget catch can. Instead of a full cleaning, I'm just going to wipe out whatever is built up on the outlet port, because that is an indicator of how much stuff the catch can is letting through. Here we go with a glove test on basically a completely cold engine. All right, look at that. Even with the catch can steel wool in its baffle and my custom baffle and a cold engine, so worst case for the PCV, this thing is trying to ingest the rubber glove. If I let go of this without keeping tension, it will pull it right into the cams and I'll be in for a world of trouble. Pull that off before anything worse happens. In fact, this is much better than stock. The stock PCV system on these engines will fail a glove test at a cold idle because there's not enough intake vacuum and there's more blow-by before the engine fully warms up. This completely changes how I'm interpreting the performance of this catch can, which also means this video is going to take a little bit longer to come out. Check-in time after about 1,000 miles of short, medium, and long trips with the catch can. Seeing what's on the dipstick. Dipstick is pretty smooth, so it's hard to tell sometimes, but it looks like the level is somewhere here in the lowermost section. Some slime and condensation visible in the outlet port, but not too bad. Inlet port definitely has slime in it, but it's not obstructed. Same as I did when I previously cleaned the catch can, time to do a glove test on a worst case, completely cold engine. Look at that, it is trying to suck the glove in out of my hand. Catch can is not obstructing the PCV system, even after 1,000 miles and with some crud in it. How's it looking here? Oh, it's definitely doing its job. Not too bad, could probably handle twice this amount before it got to the level of the baffle. Mix of water, oil, and emulsion. And minus what's really stuck in the bottom of the can here. That's come out to 2 ounces. Bottom of the can is settled with what looks to be solids or simply much more viscous components. Small amount of accumulation in the outlet port, but very clear difference between the inlet and the outlet in terms of how much is stuck to the walls. Performance-wise, it doesn't seem at risk of clogging, but I am going to pull my baffle off and take a look at the steel wool filter. As expected, more slime accumulated in here, but not to the point where anything is getting plugged up. The flow of gases plus gravity will simply carry the liquid further down into the catch can. Interesting that the emulsion that went down into the can itself is a slightly darker color, but up here at the inlet side, it's more of an off-white, much less yellow in coloration. More of the same, just darker and more viscous, collects at the bottom. This has been a long-running project, over 6 months in total now, and good thing too, because of that red herring with the pinched hose down by the block there. I only found because the starter motor broke and left me stranded in San Jose for the afternoon. Without that, I was going to be convinced that this catch can was going to be simply too restrictive. At the same time, wondering how the sintered filter versions would work at all if even the little bit of steel wool was too much of an impediment for letting the gases flow through. Found out some interesting quirks about how I had done the PCV modification all those years ago. Realized my mistake of using the wrong type of hose and not supporting it right, and ultimately found a configuration that is better for the car and allows the catch can to function to its full capability, or even a little bit more since I added that baffle to it. Even though I don't have a clear A/B test for it, simply because I would need to be driving in the exact same conditions back to back in order to properly test the function of the baffle. All in all, this budget catch can works really well, provided the rest of the system is in decent shape, especially in cases like this Volvo that have a sensitive PCV system that responds poorly to any sort of restriction. As always, your mileage may vary. I encourage you to do a functional test of the PCV system before and after installing the catch can, just to make sure you don't have an existing problem or that you're not creating another problem simply by putting the catch can in the circuit. Likewise, driving style and atmospheric conditions will play a huge role in how much material the catch can collects and how often it will need to be checked and emptied. Colder weather and shorter trips will tend to create more condensation and fill the can faster. Longer trips and hotter weather will produce less condensation, and any that does collect will be encouraged to move on because of the higher average temperature. If you use this catch can, have another model you have experience with, let me know in the comments. If you want to see some more garage shenanigans, YouTube thinks you'll like one of these. Until next time.